So I have just bought this. Now it's not a pastel coloured grandmother, it is a grandmother patch mapper. I will explain exactly what it is, what it does, what it doesn't do, but also I shall show you what I think could be a killer feature for many grandmother users. So let's start with the basics. A patch mapper, what is it? Well, the basic idea is that you set up a patch on your grandmother and then copy the control settings to the patch mapper, and then you can save this to your computer so you have a record of the patch and the settings. Now, I know what you might be thinking, and I will demonstrate my powers of telepathy in a few minutes. But first, let's just look at some of the features that this has. First of all, if you think I've gone over to the dark side by embracing the pastel coloured grandmother, that's not necessarily true, because this patch mapper lets you swap between the pastel colours and the dark colours. So I think probably for the rest of this demo I will leave it on the pastel colours because it's a little bit brighter and more colourful on the screen. So that's one thing you can do, so you can recreate the colour of your grandmother. Now, as well as setting up the controls here, there are a number of tabs which we'll go through in a second, and you will see along the top you get information about the patch. So to adjust a parameter on the panel, you can, in true software fashion, click on a control and move the mouse up and down to change the value. This is used in, I think, most software synthesizers. Personally, I think it's a little bit clunky, but with the patch mapper, if you just hover your mouse on the control and then move the mouse wheel, then this changes the control. I think this is far better, it's more intuitive. You're not moving the mouse away from the control that you're trying to change. So I think that is really cool. Also, you will see a little set of coloured LEDs. I'll try it on something slightly darker, so there is greater contrast. So you can see the LED scrolling around the controls. So I think that's pretty neat. Right, let's head over to the second tab and see what's going on here. Here we have a duplication of the ADSR controls plus a graphic, and I think this is very useful, particularly if you are not very familiar with ADSR and how it works, because it gives you a graphic display of the ADSR parameters, and as you adjust the knobs, so the graphic changes, and you can also grab these little handles and edit the graphic directly if that is easier for you. So that's neat. This is the Arpeggio section, which we will come back to in a second. This section lets you apply patch chords to the inputs and outputs on the front panel. So you are given 9 patch chords, all individually coloured. If you select one, you will see as I select parameters and so on that the details about to change up in the top of the window. So if you select a patch chord, then you can select the from and to. I have no idea what this is going to do to the sound. Then you can select the from and to, the source and the destination. Then you need to click on the proceed button, and if we go back to the front panel, you can see what I've just connected. It is oscillator 1's output into the linear FM input on oscillator 2. So you can create 9 different routines, which is probably going to be more than enough for most patches, and you can also have double inputs and double outputs. If you do that, then the cables change into plugs. Now, just one thing about this, it is a little bit clunky having to set these up and then click proceed. If you've used Reason, for example, or Arturia's modular instrument, then you essentially just click and drag cables from one connection to another. So this is a little bit clunky, but it does work. This section down here lets you enter information about the patch, such as the author and the description, and you can edit them if you want to. So let's move on to the next tab. So this is where you can set the default directory for loading and saving your patches. I haven't done that yet. There's another interesting section I would like to point out, and that is this section, which allows you to export the patch settings as a text file. So this has the details of all the controls and what they should be set to. Now most of them are set to 0 here because I have been working with an Init patch. Now there's another interesting button here which is different from Init. So if we click this, what you get in the text field is a list of the differences between the current patch and the Init patch, and as this is the Init patch, then there's very little difference to the original. I have fiddled with a few of the settings, as you will see, so that can more quickly help you set up your patch. And the next tab is a patch sheet. So this is pretty much as you would expect. The manual says that this has been designed to help people who have a colour blindness. I actually have a colour blindness as well as other problems, and unfortunately I can't really tell you how useful this might be to someone who is colourblind. So let's have a look at the final tab, and this is what I think might be the killer section for many grandmother owners, and that is the ability to change the global parameter settings from within this piece of software. Now if you've read the grandmother manual, and I hope you have, because Moog produces pretty good manuals, but by the time you get to the end and see the global parameter options and how you actually access them, you have probably lost the will to synthesize. To set up or change a global parameter, you have to hold the shift button, that's the middle button on the left of the keyboard, hold the sync button until the sync button flashes. That puts you into global parameter mode. You then have to press 1 or 2 keys on the keyboard to select the parameter that you actually want to change, and then you have to press one of the white keys on the keyboard to change the parameter. So this is fraught with potential problems. One is that there's no way to tell what any of the parameters actually are. You have to simply go into the parameter menu and set the parameter value that you want. And as there is no feedback from any of the operations, it is prone to user error. But not with this. You can see all the global parameters set out here, and you can change them and edit them all by clicking and selecting different options from drop-down menus or by clicking buttons. Now, I think this can be incredibly useful, especially if you use your grandmother with external pieces of equipment. So one thing which I do fairly often, because I use a grandmother with other equipment, is to change the Midi channel number. It's difficult to do from this menu, because if you change the Midi channel number, then you lose contact with the grandmother. And in fact, this is probably one of the easiest global menu settings to do on the grandmother itself. But other than that, if you are using with external equipment, you can set the clock source in or out. You can also set the PPQN, the pulses per quarter note, which is useful if using it with different pieces of equipment which do not have the same PPQN value. You can set the pitch bend amount, the oscillator to frequency range. This is very interesting, very useful. A lot of people have sort of complained that the pitch range between the lowest value and the highest value is not wide enough. So with this setting here, with the global parameter, you can change that so it is larger. I would say it is well worth going through your Moog Grandmother manual again, looking at the global parameters and seeing which ones you think would be useful. I think this feature alone is well worth the price of admission, even if you do not use the patch sheets. Now I am just going to skip back to the main panel. I am probably doing this in a really bad order, but I wanted to do the patch mapping settings first and then go on to the Midi and Synths control. The Grandmother, as you know, is an analog synthesizer. It does not support Midi CC, Midi continuous controller data, so you can't control any of the settings here, any of the modules externally, with one or two exceptions. And we have already looked at a lot of these in the global parameters section. But quite interestingly, you can control some parts of the oscillator section remotely and the Arpeggiator. So I've jumped over to the music machine and connected the Grandmother to it via USB MIDI. I've set up a drone so we can hear what's going on. If I click on the sync button, then you can hear the sync function is clicking in and out. The sync button actually lights on the Grandmother, which is sort of neat. We can also change the pitch using the pitch controls. I'm not sure that you would actually use this function in this software just to control these bits of the oscillator, but it's interesting that it does it. We can also use the tune function and detune oscillator 2. If you double click on a control, it sets it to its default value, so you could use that, I guess, to set that to default. It doesn't control the wave shapes, which is a bit of a shame, but I guess you probably wouldn't be using this anyway. So let's set this to neutral. And let's have a look at the Arpeggio section. So I've set up an Arpeggio, and you can see the controls here. Now you do have control, bi-directional MIDI control, using these buttons and menus, so it affects glide as well. I'm not going to do that at the minute, but we can switch the Arpeggiator or the sequencer on and off with this button. So what is probably more interest to most people, I would think, is that you can change the Arpeggiator step timing value from this drop down menu. So it's at a whole note. This is just too long. That is ridiculously fast. Let's find something a little less fast. So you can set the value here, which is obviously very useful, again, when synchronizing with other instruments. So we'll switch that off and get back to the studio. So early on in the video I said I would read your mind and tell you what you were thinking when I explained what a patch mapper was. So I think it could have been one of two things. First of all, you might have thought, well, this seems like a lot of work to just save a patch. I could take a photograph instead, which would be a lot easier. And I know a lot of people do that, especially with more complex modular equipment such as Eurorack setups. So yes, you could do that, but if you have a lot of patches, then the naming conventions could be very useful. And as you can save the files, you can also share them with other users, and even if they don't have the patch mapper, you could send them text files. Another thing you may have been thinking of was, well, I can just use a piece of paper. And yes, of course you can. There are blank patch sheets in the box when you get the Grandmother, and there are also blank patches in the manual that you can copy. But as I said, even if you don't want to use the patch mapping features of the patch mapper, you might find the ability to easily change global parameters and the arpeggio settings and the glide controls very helpful and very useful, and far easier and more convenient than messing about pressing umpteen keys and possibly making a mistake when you were doing that. So if you are wondering how much the patch mapper is, it is €15. So that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it and found it interesting. Will you be tempted by the patch mapper? Do you use patch sheets? Do you record your patches? Would you find this useful? Let me know in the comments. And if you did enjoy this video, yes, I'm going to ask you to click the big red subscribe button and ring the bell Thank you, so you get informed of new videos as soon as I release them. And please do click the big thumb, because that helps in various ways as well. As always, I appreciate you watching my videos, so for that, thank you very much indeed. I will see you in the next one.